Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey, and welcome back to Joe on Joe. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and I am back this week with a two-part episode. This is part one of it. It's very exciting. It's very exciting time. It's the first two-parter of the DIC series after, obviously, of course, the big five-parter. I'm not sure why they felt they need to break it into two parts, but we're going to go with it. And in order to help me break down the whys and the wherefores, I am joined this week by fellow podcaster Karl Stern from whenitwascool.com. Karl, welcome to Joe on Joe.
Hey, Joe, thank you so much for having me on here. I'm excited about this. Huge G.I. Joe fan. I mean, I'm a G.I. Joe pioneer, man. I've been on the G.I. Joe bandwagon since 1982.
Oh, I love it.
Bought my first action figure straight off the shelf as soon as the week they hit. I saw this and I thought, I don't know what this is, but this is superior to Star Wars. These things bend at the knees. These things have weapons. Got to be, and I've been on it ever since.
I love that attitude. I don't know what this is, but I love it. I see behind your shoulder there. I see behind your shoulder there. Are those bunch of Joes that I'm seeing on the shelf? Is that a Dragonfly?
Absolutely. Dragonfly directly above my finger right there. That is the original, the first G.I. Joe figures. There are a few blank spaces because I'm missing a few. I'm missing a Scarlet and I'm missing a Zap. Hard to find a Zap with his thumbs. The rest, that's the original the original 24, as they say.
I love it. Well, I look forward to seeing you fill in those blanks. So, Karl, you have a very cool website called whenitwascool.com, and that's part of a bigger network of podcast stuff that you work on. Tell me a little bit about When It Was Cool.
Well, whenitwascool.com is a website I started a little over a year ago. I had been involved in podcasting for many years, had been working for other people, and I wanted to do something on my own. I love retro pop culture. I don't know if you know this about the internet or not, Joe, but it's an angry place sometimes.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
So why not use the internet to have a little fun? Let's take a little break. Let's remember stuff we love. Hey, those first songs you grew up with on the radio, those toys you collected, comic books. Let's have some fun. Let's just have a good time. And that's what I went with When It Was Cool. And my wife and I, we are small business owners. We run this website, and it's all about retro pop culture. And I have had a blast doing it.
Well, it comes through. I listened to quite a few of your episodes, and your wife's Tanya. You guys just really dig into like couple subjects at a time and talk about, like, I was enjoying the one about your first concerts and just the detail you were going into, and I said this to you a little bit before we got on the air. It's funny to hear someone say you've got great camaraderie with your wife. Because, I hope you do, but you do, though. You guys are charming. You guys are absolutely charming. Where are you calling from? What part of the world are you in?
I am in the southern United States in the state of Alabama. I am deep south. I don't know if you've noticed this. I have a slight accent.
I didn't want to point that. I didn't want to make you feel uncomfortable there, Karl. So Alabama. What part of Alabama are you in?
I'm in northern Alabama. Actually, if you're familiar at all, we talked about retro pop culture. If you're familiar at all with classic rock music, so much of the stuff you know and love come out of a town called Muscle Shoals. I am just south of Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Really one of the real true heartlands of classic music. So much of the music you know and love actually didn't come from Nashville, didn't come from Los Angeles. It came from Fame Studios out of Muscle Shoals.
Didn't Skinner do Muscle Shoals stuff there?
Absolutely. Skinner, the Allman Brothers, the Rolling Stones, Aretha Franklin recorded many of her biggest hits. In fact, the first big hit out of Muscle Shoals is music done by Percy Sledge. It was local residents there. So, in fact, the famous line from the Leonard Skinner song "Sweet Home Alabama" that talks about the Swampers, and many people go, "What in the world is the Swampers?" Mm-hmm. The Swampers were the backing music band from Fame Studios and Muscle Shoals that backed up Aretha Franklin, Rolling Stones, everybody else. So that's where that line comes from.
That's very cool. I personally always thought they were talking about the Dreadnoughts.
Could be.
Quite frankly.
They're our swampers. They're absolutely our swampers.
And tell me about the When It Was Cool podcast. How often you guys, because your feed has multiple, you have different shows on it, right? So let's talk about the shows and the frequency and stuff that you do.
Yes, the flagship show is the When It Was Cool podcast. We do it every 2 weeks. And on those alternating weeks, we have two different people that come in, two friends of ours that do the Uphill Both Ways podcast. And so every single week, if you subscribe by iTunes or TuneIn, Stitcher, any of your podcasting apps, we are on every week with a show, but the flagship When It Was Cool show is every 2 weeks. And then if you come to our website, whenitwascool.com, we actually have a show every single day by different podcast and content providers. So we've got something going on every day at When It Was Cool.
That's great. And you're a Patreon supported podcast, right?
Absolutely. Yes. We're 100. Another thing, I don't know if you know this about the internet or not, Joe, but sometimes you go to a website and you're inundated with pop-up ads, autoplay videos, stuff that just drives you nuts. I said, we're not going to have any of that. People are going to either like our content and want to support that, or we're not going to do it. We're going to be fun. We're not going to stress anybody out When It Was Cool. We're going to be your place to come to have some fun, think about old times. And certainly, I mean, when I think about classic retro stuff, the two that come to mind is, in this order, G.I. Joe and Star Wars, because that's what I grew up on. I mean, I'm born 1971, so that if you do the math, if I was born in 1971, by 1982, I'm 11 years old. I am perfect age to hit the store and get G.I. Joe. And I grew up with it, and I love it.
Yeah.
Passion for collecting it.
That's great. Yeah, me too, man. So we can find you online at WIW Cool. That's your Twitter, your Facebook, your Instagram, and you go to patreon.com and check out WIW Cool as well, right? To see how they can learn more about your show and all the things that you guys are offering.
Absolutely. That's the perfect place to get us. Very active on Twitter. By all means, follow me and we'll follow you back, and we'll talk good, old, classic, retro pop culture.
And I'd be remiss if I didn't miss this. That's a segue for me to talk. We just launched a Patreon as well a few weeks ago, and we're at patreon.com/JoeOnJoePod. And what I'm doing there is I'm doing a probably about 5 times a month, we're going to be dropping a deep dive into the G.I. Joe comic books. We're calling it Joe on Joe Illustrated. We've already, as of this recording, we've already released at least 3 issues. I think by the time this actually airs, we'll probably be on 5 or 6. And I'm doing a what I'm calling a masterclass in comic book breakdown. Like, we're going page by page, almost panel by panel, and dissecting the choices that the artists are making, the writers, some of certainly the plot points, and we're recapping what's happening. But we're really treating each piece of comic book art like a piece of art and kind of breaking it down. So I think it's a really interesting deep dive. I've been reading comics for 30 years. I've got 38,000 comic books. So, yeah, so that's kind of like my wheelhouse. I'm really having fun doing it. So I hope when you're out there, you're checking out When It Was Cool on Patreon, you'll go to Joe on Joe Pod at Patreon as well and see what we have to offer. We're going to be adding more and more stuff as the thing continues to grow.
When you talk about the comic book, that's where you hit me.
Well, we released issue 1 on our regular feed, and I think I'm going to do about every 5 issues on our regular feed so people can see what they're missing over there. And it's fun, man. Like it's so I work at Golden Apple out here, and every Saturday is my favorite day of the week because all we do is talk comics, and we get into details about comics. And I'm like, now I'm doing it on the podcast, and I'm really, because I love the cartoon and I love G.I. Joe in general, but I love the comic book and I know the comic book, so it's been a real good time. What is your do you still collect comics, or what's your
absolutely
your current geek status?
Absolutely. I have to admit, comics are struggling right now. But that's the thing about comics is you have a good, 80 years worth of back material.
Yeah.
So if the current material is not good, find something from the archives. Now, the G.I. Joe comic was my thing. I was way more into it than I was the animated series because of the time difference. It came out I was a little younger, grew up to read on comics, love comics. So I was very much into the stories there. And I was kind of confused when the animated series came out, because I was like, "There's differences here. Wait a minute, Scarlet doesn't love Duke; she loves Snake Eyes. What's this all about?" And so, of course, it doesn't take you long to just accept that this is two different things and roll with it. And hey, that's awesome. More GI Joe content, the better. So,
right? Yeah, I agree. It was one of my first experiences of like multiple Earths, and like understanding that two things can simultaneously exist and not necessarily, have to always be the same thing, which is so funny when they started doing all the comic book movies, like around the X-Men and Spider-Man stuff came out, and all the non-geeks in my life, and I saw like in public and everything, all the non-geeks were saying like, well, is that exactly what happens in the comic books? And I'm like, well, no. Like, why does it have to be? Even me, I was saying, like, it doesn't have to be exactly. Like, it's a different thing. And they're like, but I thought it was supposed to be exactly that. And I'm like, wow. Like, I learned this lesson when I was like 10.
Why would it be? Because you've already got that thing. Here's something different. So,
Right. Yeah, exactly. But listen, that's why there's what do they say? That's why there's vanilla, and that's why there's chocolate. And there's certainly a lot of geek ice cream to go around these days, for sure.
Yes, and there are a lot of people who really, they adore the G.I. Joe animated series. That is their G.I. Joe to them, and that's great. That's awesome. It wasn't the comics were more mine as far as the story goes, but really, I have to be honest. Really, the file cards on the action figure was mine, because that's where I first came in. So that's really three, if you kind of look at it, three different Elseworlds, for lack of a better term. So
it's a really great way to look at it. I don't think we've ever phrased it that way. You're absolutely right, because the file cards were close to how they were portrayed in the comics and on the cartoon, but very often they veered wildly from it, and they would give the better written ones, they would give personality choices, and they'd give background, and they'd kind of tell you what this guy's up to. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is like three different Elseworlds versions.
Right. And when you're a kid, your play universe, that gave you so much freedom, because you had just this basic real name, where this guy's from, what he does, and then the rest of it's left up to your imagination. Where if you read the comic, they lead you along in a story, which is great. I love it. Same thing with the cartoon. But man, when you're just an 11, 12-year-old kid, and you got a file card that said, this is this guy's real name, this is what he does in the military, this is his weapon, now go do that.
Yeah.
That gives so much room for imagination. And I think that's why that stuff, rather than even Star Wars, which is based on a movie, how the story's going.
Right.
I think that's why it lends to so much more imagination. Really, for me, G.I. Joe does.
Yeah, I think you're saying quite a bit there. So we are now into the DIC episodes, Karl, and you might have been because you would have been like in high schoolish by the time these aired, right?
Yeah.
So
were you
definitely still following at this point, or are these when you came to these, were you a little older, like in your fandom, and just coming at it as a fan versus like coming at it from a day-to-day, like this is what I watch?
In real time, I probably only saw a few of the Deke episodes. They were very few. I had certainly dropped off the animated series by then. Well, definitely, because I saw very few historically of the Deke episodes. It was only after later years, getting them on VHS, some third generation copy or something like that, seeing these, that I ever even was exposed to this. And I'm like, well, this is this is a thing that's kind of different. So let's face it, some of the G.I. Joe action figures coming out at that time too were grounded in a different sort of world than the original ones were.
They were, and they certainly were.
Yeah, so, and this episode we got coming up, it's the characters are a little out there. They're not necessarily reminiscent of their original incarnations.
They are a little out there. And I said up top that I don't understand why this was a two-parter, and I stand by that. I really don't understand why this was a two-parter. There's not enough plot that happens to justify this being a two-part episode. This is
it's sparse.
It is just 100% a MacGuffin episode, which is fine and great, and like what Cobra does in it, is fun. Like I actually very little complaints about what happens, but it doesn't need to be 2 parts.
No, definitely not. Yeah, there's some character work a little bit. I mean, I guess you
The
can
Hawk
go
stuff
with,
is great.
yeah. Salvo, I guess, is flushed out a little bit. Spirit is kind of in there. General Hawk, I suppose, is the main. Although I have to admit, even though I'm very deep in the G.I. Joe well, when he first came on, I'm like, who's this guy?
Yeah. They have him dressing like a camouflaged astronaut. Like
absolutely.
Yeah, and if you look at his action figure, that version came with actually he used, this is kind of neat though. He uses it in this episode, this jetpack, this like winged sky jet jetpack. And in my head, I'm going like, well, in the very first iteration of the toys, you had a small one-man rocket called a Jump that didn't take up 5 feet of space. And
absolutely.
And why do you now have to go to a giant? Like,
absolutely.
guys achieved that technology 10 years ago.
Yeah, they kind of went back and got big, huge. Yeah.
Unless because he had like a space helmet, like kind of maybe he could go into the upper atmosphere a little further. Maybe that was the thing. I don't know.
Right.
They took the name Skyhawk literally.
Absolutely, they did. And what always kills me about these episodes, and I've heard you mention it before too, when you've been talking with other guests on other episodes, they are selling the action figures in that. I don't care if these folks are sitting down in their favorite restaurant. Gridiron's got that helmet on. These guys are dressed up exactly, and doesn't matter if Hawk's going to church, he's wearing that jetpack in there.
Yes,
so
yes, he is. More so, honestly, more so than the Sunbow stuff. The Sunbow, they would change their clothing, and I guarantee some of that is budget. Some of that is absolutely them just not wanting to reach the characters. But they would have them in different outfits. They wouldn't always be doing exactly with their action figure. Not this time though. Not DIC. And they're like, we have 8 characters that we're pushing this year. That's the only characters we're going to use over and
absolutely
over and over again.
Well, one thing I noticed that was hilarious, and maybe we'll run up on it because it's only for about a 1 second burst. It's maybe 2 frames. They actually reused a frame in part 1 where they're running away. G.I. Joe is retreating from Cobra, and the frame they use. Totally different characters that are in this, like Sergeant Slaughter's going down through that. He's not even in this episode,
I think I know what you're talking about. I think I see Sergeant Slaughter tackle somebody.
Yes, he's running away, and I guarantee you that is somebody said, "Hey, we need a scene of them running away. Somebody grab me some people running."
That's so funny. Well, you know what? With that in mind, let's get into it, man. Let's start watching this episode. So remember, everyone, go to whenitwascool.com. Check out Karl Stern's webpage and his podcast. While you're on there, you find him on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram at WIWCool. Find me at Joe and Joe Pod. If you want to be a guest on the show, just like Karl did, send me an email to joeandjoepod@gmail.com and let me know. So, Karl, are you ready to watch Victory Volcana? It's
absolutely.
Volcania. I keep saying Volcana because Volcana was a Marvel comic supervillain. Yeah. Victory Volcania, part 1. Are you ready to go?
Absolutely.
All right, my friend. Well, let's do this. So, Karl, as I'm listening to this show for this song, the song, like this song, it's funny. There's one thing that we're going to talk about. You're going to join me for the second part of this. We're going to do another episode for next week, and in all the times I've heard this song, it's relatively new to the show. It just dawned on me this time that this is a wrestling intro theme song.
Absolutely, it is.
This 100%. Would be so comfortable on the Pile Driver album from the WWF.
100%. You know what's weird is, of course, Operation Dragonfly had a rework of the old theme. They just changed it to International Hero. Never mentioned Cobra.
No.
This theme, no problem. It's something about American Hero, and Cobra's mentioned 3 or 4 times. They couldn't make up their mind. I don't know what they thought they were doing.
So the show starts against Victory Volcania. It's written by David Carron and Larry Carroll. We're opening on a G.I. Joe like vacation resort.
A fishing boat.
A fishing, yeah. It's their R&R base. But the weird thing about this is that we never really see the R&R base.
No, we don't.
I'm not imagining that, right? Like there's a small series of huts, but that's not an R&R base.
No, and a complete and total air base on the other side. So I don't know. Maybe they're R&R in the jungle or something. I don't know.
Right. And later on, of course, we learn that Hawk was made in charge of this base, and I'm like,
yes.
What did he do to deserve this? So before we get too far of ourselves, we got some Cobra Frogmen. And what kind of vipers are those? Do you know off the top of your head?
No, these are some of the latter day Vipers that I was not that deep into the G.I. Joe well at that point in time. Yeah. I certainly remember those figures. They were definitely action figures produced of those, but I don't remember the names.
I think by their look, I was trying to identify them when I was prepping for the show, and I've never really settled on exactly who I think it was. They looked a little bit like the Toxo Vipers.
Yeah. I barely recognized Spirit. I was like, who's this guy hanging out with Salvo?
This is they're playing football, but of course it's over a tennis court.
A tennis court, yes.
Like what is going on here? And
they definitely didn't draw their field lines very good. Yeah, it goes right through the.
It's crazy, and I like that they. Pathfinder's just wrestling an alligator in the middle of everything.
Randomly. Yes. Just for rest of relaxation, I guess.
For no good reason. I like that they included Stretcher. He's very cool. Although he was very quick to just run over and start wrapping a bandage around the guy that was hurt. Ambush is literally hiding in bushes.
For no apparent reason. Just chilling out in the... Yes.
He can't stop ambushing people.
Even on the R&R base.
Yeah. Now, we just learned probably the coolest thing of this episode is that General Hawk they're actually doing some character advancement. That Hawk is saying that he's old and the generals retired him and they put him in charge of this resort. I wouldn't call this a resort, by the way. Not in the least. So that's kind of cool though, because, Hawk is one of the originals. So they're saying that time goes on and he's aged out and we have to retire him and give him a Spaceman rocket pack.
Absolutely. Let's retire this guy and give him the most overly ridiculous costume we can give him. And do you notice too, they dog him through this whole episode. Everybody's calling him old. I'm thinking somebody on the staff there at Deke must have had like their 40th birthday or something, and this was an inside joke because they're just dogging Hawk through this whole thing.
They really are. They really are. So Destro shows up and he's got his Iron Grenadiers and they're attacking. Hawk is very capably flying here. And it leads me to the question of what did Hawk do? I get that when you get older, sometimes you can't necessarily be in the front lines. Okay. I don't mean to be ageist here, but so as far as I'm concerned, the G.I. Joes are successful.
Right. Begs another question, too.
He led a crew of dudes that did their jobs.
Exactly. Well, it also begs the question, who's in charge now? Because last I saw this, it was him. So, if they've kicked him to the curb, what are we doing now? Who's the boss?
Yeah, well, literally every Joe that we've seen on these DIC episodes is on this vacation thing. They're all there.
That's right.
Because they've chosen to focus on the smaller roster of Joes. Well, they're all on vacation, and Hawk's in charge of the place, not them. Who's running the show?
Yep, Well, I guess Cobra Commander's aware of this because he's brought his entire crew. So he's just getting G.I. Joe. This isn't even about world conquest no more. This is about, okay, you're going on vacation. Guess who's coming? Yeah. Guess who's having frogmen in the water? Guess who's getting on your fishing boat? That'd be Cobra.
I'm going to be like a rain cloud on a beach. I'm going to ruin your vacation. That's what I'm into. That is what I'm into.
Now it's time for you to
And
get out
it's
here,
funny
too.
though that they're playing Hawk as old, because in this crazy outfit that he has, and I'm not a fan of it, he looks super young. The way they draw is they give him Superman spit curl, dark, luxurious brown hair. Like, if maybe make him gray or something. Like,
yeah, you're exactly right.
That's what you're going for here, guys. And you know what's funny? Made fun of Metalhead quite a bit on the show because he's pretty stupid. But it just, as I was prepping for this show, I realized I was looking at his file card. He has the big gimmick for his toy, and I don't know if you know this, Karl. He has a, quote, audio-activated missiles. So when he's yelling,
absolutely,
bang, that's the toy.
Yes. I actually have a carded one of them right over my head somewhere on camera of Metalhead. Yes, and he shows up. He is the star of the Deke series for Cobra, in that they chose to focus on all the way through to the end. Yeah. You've got to put up with him all the way through this series.
Oh yeah,
just amazing.
He's garbage. He's garbage.
He's awful.
Garbage. He's garbage. But the fact that the card had him using his vocal bang bang to fire everything, and they do that on the show, I got to give him props though. That's good synchronization, you know.
Oh yes, trust me. Would you trust that guy to operate a complicated missile guidance system or something, or would you just say, you know what, say bang and they'll go?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Just for fun. Put them all together.
So, you know, the other thing that keeps happening is as this animation goes on, Hawk's grenades appear and disappear quite a bit.
Oh, I've got something to say about grenades.
Oh, you mean when they get captured?
When they get captured,
and they're still they still have grenades on their chests? Yes. Okay,
you
noticed that too.
4 big prominent grenades, yes, of course. You know. I'm like, hey, I don't know about you guys. I've got a plan.
Let's pull a pin on one of these grenades. What do you say? Oh my gosh. So we're gonna go in a commercial break. We'll be right back. Today's file card features on the G.I. Joe Ostriker driver, codenamed Crankcase. His file name is Elwood G. Indiana. His primary military specialty is the motor vehicle driver. His secondary specialty is the armor. And his birthplace is Lawrence, Kansas. There are several ways to get from one place to another in Kansas, and driving fast is most of them. Crankcase was racing street machines when he was 16. This was no great feat since he had been building them from the time he was 13. He worked the stock car circuit for years until the boredom hit him like a brick wall. A recruiting sergeant with a crooked smile signed him up for a burst of 4 with promises of speed and glory. Crankcase graduated Ranger School and Desert Warfare School and attended the Special Air Service Tactical Driving School under the NATO exchange program. He's a qualified expert in the M16, M19 11A1, the M60, and the TOW. Quote, ever get irritable when you're standing in a line that just doesn't seem to be moving at all? Well, the whole world seems to be moving in slow motion to Crankcase all the time. That's why he's constantly ticked off. He's just not happy unless he has a wheel in one hand, a shifter in the other, and the wind in his face. Crankcase is one of those guys I feel like was a forgotten Joe, while his vehicle just took off like gangbusters. Because they use the Ostriker for everything on the show. They use it all the time in the comics. Everything, but it was the utilitarian Jeep, so like they didn't need a Jeep driver. Like they didn't like, hey, I need to go fight Cobra on this battlefield. We better get Crankcase. Crankcase, I totally feel got left aside, and I'm here to say that's a shame. First of all, he's a snappy redhead. He's got a snappy mustache. He's got a great name. If you look closely at his action figure, he's got a watch on. That's pretty cool. Not a lot of Joes had watches. His helmet was also sweet. I liked his helmet. It was gray. It was kind of wide set. So I'm all for Crankcase, man. I salute Crankcase. I do think it's funny that his name is Elwood G. Indiana, but he's from Lawrence, Kansas. That just makes me chuckle. We're named the driver Indiana. So listen, Elwood G. Indiana, Crankcase, we salute you. Got to get top G.I. Joe. All right, we're back. Man, we left with Metalhead just banging away, and this is kind of cool. The Cobra's got him on the run, though. You know, I would have liked to have seen them if they were vacationing in actual like relaxation clothes. You know, like,
yeah. Or at least a resort of some sort, you know, sitting on the beach, you know, sipping Yo-Jo Cola or something like that.
Right?
But no, you know.
Oh, we could have had some Yo-Jo Cola in this.
I suppose we have tennis courts to play tennis, and I suppose we have alligators to wrestle. And if you're into ambushing people randomly, you can do that too, but not much beyond that. So.
Yeah, pretty much. The other thing that stood out, as long as we're talking about like costumes and stuff, the color schemes on this era, and it's going to sound weird because obviously when the very first Joes, they were all in pretty much the same green outfits, right? You know, pretty close, right?
Yes. Oh, yes.
But the color schemes for this era, at least on the cartoon, they're all this kind of weird muted green. You see what I'm saying? Like they're all it's like a palette of green and brown and gray on everyone.
Yes, and that very much, if you think about, this is just after the Slaughter Marauders era and Tiger Force and Python Patrol and all that. They're experimenting definitely outside of the main color palette. They're getting into, like you said, kind of muted, weird color schemes.
Yeah.
They're all over the place.
Yeah.
Cobra was doing the same thing with the Python Patrol stuff. It's very odd.
Okay, so there's Duke. They finally drew Duke again for the first time.
Yep.
I think we also have Lady J here. And this episode is actually both these two episodes are okay. That woman's voice right there, as she jumped, that's the only female voice in this both two-parter.
Absolutely. Even though Baroness and Zorana
are absolutely in part 2.
Yep. They're in part 1. They're showing up. Yeah. Never say a word.
Nope.
Never utter.
Nope. Yeah. And I have a feeling that the was just one of the guys doing a female voice.
Probably. Yeah.
There's no female voices on these episodes. And we've noticed this in other DIC episodes either. Like they were just
really? So
yeah, there's whole episodes where it's just all dudes. They're just bereft of female voice actors.
I thought it might just be this one, but no.
No, you couldn't even get one. So
and Destro's terrible in this episode too.
Yeah. He's also got some really weird facial animations on him. Like very cartoony. Like like a some kind of Jerry Lewis clown like expression on his face.
Absolutely.
In these places. So they've put the Joes that they've captured, Salvo and Bullhorn. By the way, Bullhorn, our intervention specialist, comes in very handy.
Poor idea.
Yeah, and that's the Bullhorn we just saw. That's where he's quote in captivity, and he still has 4 grenades on his chest.
So that's Bullhorn, not Spirit. They never identify this guy.
No, they don't. No, that's Bullhorn. I'm sorry. Yeah, yes, but Spirit. It's funny though, because Spirit was one of Slaughter's Marauders. Spirit was on the Dragonfire episodes.
Gotcha.
That is Bullhorn. And
I did not know that.
Yes,
okay, I just guessed because they never identify him. That I saw it. If they did, I missed it. So yeah, he's carrying around like 4 giant grenades on his chest the whole time.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And his action figure came with a Bullhorn. That was his big action accessory. Your toy can speak louder.
Now I've got to get a Bullhorn action figure. I've got to find him.
I know, right? Hey, kids, Bullhorn, he can speak louder.
I'll set him up just shouting randomly at the other Joes.
So here we're learning the MacGuffin of the show, so to speak. So they're gonna, and I'm down with this. I like this. There's a volcano. They're gonna harness the volcanic energy. It's going to power these giant lasers that they can use. They call them space lasers, I think, that they can use to blast satellites out of space, but also somehow, this is the part that confuses me, somehow it can also stretch across the planet. Maybe they're flat. Maybe Cobra's a bunch of flat earthers, Karl. Maybe that's what it is.
Could be.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe so.
Yeah. Cobra could be flat earthers. So we can reach anywhere on the planet Earth. Don't worry about the blast arcing over, don't worry about that. Yeah. We can hit anywhere on the world from this ground stationed laser.
Now, I think, I forgot what satellite this was they blasted, but I do think this was like some sort of super communication satellite, or I hope they didn't just take down their GPS so they can aim this thing, They just knocked out
DirecTV. They're like, we just want to piss off 38% of the American public. That's all we want to do. That's all we wanted to.
As far as plans go and weapons go, this is not the worst one I've seen them use by far.
And I love that they even put these anti-air cannons around the edge of the volcano too.
Yeah, planning ahead. Who would have thought? Cobra's, and really, it's just Cobra Commander. Nobody else is really pitching in on this scheme. I mean, Destro's kind of around, but does he really do anything? I mean, not much.
Real quick, this is funny too. So not only. Okay, so as far as like reaching any city on the planet, and yeah, they just blew up the world's largest communication satellite. I think they called it ComSat 1. So now it just dawned on me that those lasers, not only are they stationed on the planet Earth for as far as elevation goes, but they're actually located inside the volcano. So they literally can only shoot straight up in the air without going through the side of the volcano. And from this angle, we are going to get every satellite and every city. I don't know how any of that works.
Obviously, smarter than we are. So,
smarter, yeah. I love this little Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom moment. The guys are in a mine car, and it's Salvo and Bullhorn. They're making their escape. Although, really, they're just heading towards the beach where there's more vipers. So
yeah, they're riding a roller coaster. Yeah. That's what this is. This is what this scene is.
Yeah, and those appear to be alley vipers, of course, perfectly suited for the beach.
Absolutely.
And there's Metalhead, very angry as we go to break. Hey, listeners, I'm not sure if you've heard the news, but Joe and Joe has started a Patreon, and I'm inviting you along for the ride. Go to patreon.com/JoeandJoePod and check out my page. Right now, there are 2 opportunities for you to help support the show. You can choose to be a grunt or a viper. Grunts get access to all the Joe and Joe episodes and early access to new episodes as they're created. Vipers get all that and access to my all-new spin-off podcast, Joe and Joe Illustrated, where I will be breaking down every single issue of the G.I. Joe comic books, page by page, in the deepest dive you'll ever hear on G.I. Joe. So go to patreon.com/JoeandJoePod and see what's happening over at the Fort Wadsworth Motor Pool. We'll see you there.
I'm loving Metalhead on this thing. Loving him.
You know what's funny? In the Sunbow stuff, we talked a lot about gravity brakes because all their brakes would be they'd be falling off a cliff. Gravity would be the enemy, right? On this one, they're Metalhead brakes.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Both commercials have ended with Metalhead staring at the camera, going, "I'm gonna get you."
And his never-ending supply of missiles.
No, never-ending supply of missiles. So that's our new thing. Yeah. So we're gonna start counting Metalhead brakes. I feel like Bullhorn, when they made the G.I. Joe movie back then, Bullhorn would have been who played Richie Valens, La Bamba? It was awesome. Jimmy Smits. He was a Young Guns. Lou Diamond Phillips. Lou Diamond Phillips
gotcha.
Absolutely is
perfect.
Bullhorn. Completely.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're exactly right.
Completely. Yeah. Carl, so there's something we do on my show that we right around third act, I love to ask my guests, if you could be a member of the Joe or Cobra team, what would you be? And what would your specialty be, and what would your code name be?
Well, being a fan of this show, I've put some thought into this. Okay. Knew this question was coming. So obviously, on Twitter, on social media, on everywhere, I already have a code name, but it totally doesn't fit what I would do. My code name would, of course, be Dragon King Karl, because that's my code name.
Okay.
Now that would of course insinuate I would be a ninja of some sort, or perhaps something similar to Budo, a samurai. But nah, that's not really up my alley anymore. Maybe 30 years ago and 100 pounds ago, perhaps. But, in my older age, maybe not so much so.
You're like General Hawk now. You're like General Hawk.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to strap on a futuristic outfit and get me a jetpack. No,
I'm going to put you in charge of like a beachfront hut.
Yeah, exactly. The jetpack, the very thing you need for your knees going bad, is exactly what you need. So I would probably do some sort of what G.I. Joe needs that they never had, and that's some sort of forensic investigator,
Okay.
somebody who comes along, somebody that is like, you know what, this has the telltale signs of Cobra. How do they figure out Cobra does some of this stuff? Does, of course, on this show, Cobra Commander just gets on TV and goes, Cobra, guess what? I'm blowing your bridge up.
He really does. He really does. Pop up on TV
he does
a
exactly
lot.
that. Yeah. So, but in a more realistic setting, how would they figure out that, hey, this building here got blown up because Cobra did it? Well, you need a forensic investigator. So I would probably be that guy. Now, back in my early days, maybe I ran around with a bazooka. Maybe I had an M16. But now, I'm kind of older, kind of wiser. And so I'm the dude that goes in and figures out, did Cobra do this, or is this some other, mythical terrorist organization? So I'm Dragon King Karl, and I am the G.I. Joe forensics investigator.
I love it. So you're keeping the name Dragon King Karl.
Yes, for no other reason than just if that dude can be Bullhorn, I can be Dragon King Karl.
I love it. You're absolutely right. Dragon King Karl, the forensic investigator. And you're right. We totally need a forensic investigator. That's fantastic.
Somebody's coming.
What's your accessory?
My accessory, that's great. It would have to be something. I don't want to go something so corny and obvious like a laptop or something.
How about an oversized microscope? Because
perfect.
Mainframe's computer was like the size of a Buick. So
absolutely,
yours would be like a microscope, but just a huge microscope, and you're like, I need to see everything.
Absolutely, yeah. Get down to microscopic levels. We just electron microscope. No doubt. Because if Cobra uses like nanotechnology, maybe they put that little Cobra logo stamp on one. And
Sure,
I can see it. I can see it. Figure the stuff out.
Hey, we were just talking nanotechnology last episode on Joe on Joe. That's awesome. So Dragon King Karl, welcome to the ranks of Joe on Joe, my friend. Proud to
thank you very much.
Proud to have you. So back on the show, Cobra Commander successfully is now threatened to blow up the world, but this is really funny. They're getting all these complaints from the world, just like we joked about earlier with knocking out your satellite dish. There's no one's taking him serious. They're complaining that he preempted Bowling for Dollars for this.
That's exactly right. Where's Monday Night Football? That's your fault.
This is really funny. But these are the scenes. You've got Zorana, you've got Baroness. Neither of them say a word.
No. And sometimes they're on screen for a few moments, being told, do something, mash this button, do this thing over here. Yeah. And Baroness in the past would have said, no way, Cobra.
Okay,
no,
check this out. Wait a minute. Check this out. They just drew the space gun just finally elevated to the top of the thing. That makes sense. So maybe, maybe they put some thought into that. Maybe they're like, all right, if we're hitting land, we have to arc it a little bit. I'm not super familiar with rivers in California, but I believe he just referred to the California River. California
River, and clearly the Golden Gate Bridge,
right?
Called,
yeah. And so they're arcing across. I mean, this thing shoots across the world. And it hits the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, listen though, I think there is that unwritten rule. If you're going to use the Golden Gate Bridge, it has to be destroyed.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
Yeah. If I were living in a fictional world where there was terrorism and crazy plagues and things like that, I would just open up a Golden Gate Bridge manufacturing contractor business. You'd be a millionaire.
No doubt, that's the way to go.
Yeah, you'd be a millionaire. So that was it for this episode. Ends with Cobra successfully destroying the Golden Gate Bridge, which is exciting.
Yes.
The Joes, they had masqueraded as Vipers, so they're going to break back into the volcano.
Yeah, and why? Why did they put on those Viper outfits? What were they hiding from? I never understood that part. They didn't put the helmets on, mind you. They just ran around in their football helmet and Viper outfit. But whatever.
Maybe they just needed to get they just wanted to fool them just long enough to get close enough to lob one of the grenades that they never took off them.
That's it.
Maybe that was the thinking behind it. So, I mean, honestly, overall, not a terrible episode.
No,
it really isn't. It's a fun premise. I like that Cobra wins a little bit. They're certainly using a lot of the cast. That's cool. I love the Hawk getting older stuff. I just don't know why it needs to be a two-parter.
Yeah, it was sparse, but as far as Deke episodes go, this was not the worst one by any stretch of imagination.
That might have been last week's. We recorded Granny Dearest.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that.
That's what is that? That's the third episode out of the gate for Deke, and they go, "Hey, what do you think? We got a brand new show debuting. What should we slot in the third episode that people are going to see?" Granny Dearest. Yes, that sounds fantastic.
It's almost as if they aren't trying.
Oh my goodness gracious. Well, listen, Karl, this has been fantastic. We're gonna wrap it up now, and join us next week for part 2 of Victory Volcania. Remember, go to whenitwascool.com. Check out Karl's stuff. Karl, I'm gonna see you next week.
My pleasure. Be glad to.
Oh, fantastic, man. Well, Dragon King Karl, speaking for you. This is Deep Dish, and signing off. Now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.